No worries. All right, we are preparing to be YouTube streaming. Hello, Ray. How are you?
Yeah, it's almost 9 o'clock where I am at in Pennsylvania.
Oh,
Why in the world are you in Pennsylvania? Although I shouldn't probably ask.
My grandma lives in Erie, Pennsylvania, and the other one grandma lives in Cleveland area. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
visiting grandmas.
Hey,
So
how are you?
I'm in your home state
I know.
because you're from Pennsylvania.
Yes, I'm from Philly, which can sometimes be different from Pennsylvania. But yes, I'm from Pennsylvania. I've never been
right.
out to Erie though.
What's
I
your
don't
favorite
think-
thing about Erie?
That's pretty nice.
I don't think I've ever
Presque
met
Isle
anybody
State
from
Park. Went kayaking there today on the lake.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm. Have you been to Pennsylvania, Bob?
No, I have not, and I don't think I've ever met anybody from Pennsylvania. All the people that I knew in my years in the Army and
Wow.
wherever else I've been, you'd think I'd have met somebody, but not that I can recall.
I will say I'm not originally from Pennsylvania. I'm originally from North Carolina, but grandparents live here.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, I'm originally from Pennsylvania, so you have now met a Pennsylvanian.
yes, I feel privileged and honored.
I feel a lot of pressure now. I have to
Oh,
do
there you go.
Pennsylvania right.
Yeah, you really got to perform for us now. Huh?
Ray, I am envious of your summer. You have just been on such great trips during these PAT meetings. I love it.
Next, I'll be back in Oregon. Yeah.
Ray, I have been in the middle of it. Are you visiting Pennsylvania?
I'm currently in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Because I have to say, having grown up in Maryland, right now, Oregon is so much better. It's so humid over there.
Yes.
I'm from the South, so humidity is what I grew up with.
See, I grew up in Maryland. I grew up with it, but no.
Yeah, I remember many times when I was down in Fort Benning, Georgia, the humidity down there is just incredible.
Yep, that's what I grew up with. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ray, I think you were saying that you were from North Carolina. Which part?
I was born in Charlotte and raised in a suburb called Kannapolis. It was a mill town until they converted. Yeah.
My brother lives in Cary, which is in the Raleigh area.
Okay. Yep. Raleigh Durham area. Yeah.
I visited.
I'll be going to North Carolina next this weekend.
See, the last time I was there a few years ago in July, every time I walked outside, I was like, why? Why?
When did you move here, Ray?
Twice. One time for grad school and then one time for a job. But first time in 2014 for PSU.
Oh, okay.
And then 2018 for a job.
Yeah.
All right. Hello to Mike and Heidi and Denise and Abe and everybody else that's joining. We're just talking about East Coast stuff and summer
Laura?
vacations. Yes.
I'm having a little bit of a Zoom hiccup on my end, so I'm going to drop off and rejoin. Just wanted to let you know. I'll be back in 1 minute.
All right. See ya. Does anyone else have any good vacations planned this summer or fun trips?
In September, late September, I'm going to Hawaii. I know. I've never been.
Which island?
Big Island. We're staying over in Kona where it's dry.
Yep.
Very nice. Well, enjoy.
I hope to.
We've got a road trip in September to Bozeman to see our son and his significant other and their two dogs. So we'll probably take the route and swing up through Grand Teton and Yellowstone all the way. But waiting till September so we don't have to deal with quite the crowd that is there now.
Beautiful.
Interesting
Yeah, I'm heading to
read.
Montana too.
It's interesting I get a lot of information about what's going on in Bozeman, and it's growing so fast. And we think we have housing cost issues and traffic and growth issues. They're having a horrible time in Bozeman dealing with all the people that want to move there. Their businesses are having a much worse time there than here, even in getting workers, because for the prevailing wage, no one can afford to live, not just in Bozeman, but even in the surrounding area. So it's happening everywhere.
What part of Montana is Bozeman in, Mike?
It is southwest, kind of in the southwest corner.
Okay.
If you go through Spokane and Coeur d'Alene and then cross the Idaho Panhandle, once you cross into Montana, it's a couple hours drive. It's right on I-90, maybe a little more. I mean, it's a huge state, but yeah, it's kind of down in the southwest corner, just only about 45 minutes or so north of Yellowstone.
Oh, okay. So it is west of the Rocky Mountains?
Yes. Yes, I'm from Northwest Montana, from up by Glacier Park. And Bozeman is very much, Bozeman, Missoula, Billings are like a whole different world than the rest of Montana. We don't quite know what to do with it.
The standing joke, and my son says that the joke in Bozeman is the great thing about living in Bozeman is in 15 minutes you can be in Montana.
Yeah. I knew a guy that took a job in Arkansas, and after a few months I asked him how it was going, and he says, this little town is a great little town. The only bad part of it is it's surrounded by the rest of Arkansas. I didn't ask him to go into details.
Welcome, Richard.
Hi, sorry, I was on a different call, so I'm late. Are you doing some kind of a check-in?
We're talking about Montana. We were talking generally about summer vacations or places that we would like to go, or maybe you're traveling to.
Family vacation on the coast, 2 weeks from now. Be great. Yeah, a very favorite place.
Sounds lovely.
Yes.
I am not going to Montana. Everybody seems to be there, so if it's too crowded, I don't want to go.
Are you going anywhere else?
I have a high school reunion in October. I am going to go to Preservation Field School through the University of Oregon to learn all about Portland cement. So you decide whether you think that's traveling. So I'm going to Concrete. Does anybody know where that is?
Are you talking up in Washington?
Concrete, Washington, yes.
I've done some work there for Concrete, Washington. It's up in Skagit County.
Yep. So that'll be very exciting. When I get back, you can ask me anything about Portland cement.
Very nice. All right, and welcome to the call, Emma. All right, it looks.
Yeah. What?
Let's see, it looks like it's 6:07. Is everyone all right if we start? Yes,
Let's
all
do
right.
it.
I'm going to, we are now live on YouTube and recording as well. Thank you to the 9th Project Advisory Team for OC 2040. Today is July 28th, 2021 at 6:08 p.m. Welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us. Before we start, perhaps we could just go around and state our name and the sort of the positions that we're holding on here. If you like, my name's Laura Turway. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Oregon City. And I'm just going to call on people in the order in which they are on my screen. I apologize if it gets jumbled up and I miss you at the end. Christina, you are next to me.
Hi, I'm Christina Winberry. I'm a planner with 3J Consulting, along with Anais, and I'm helping out with this project in terms of PAT meetings and also any kind of community engagement work so far with Oregon City. So.
All right, and Bob?
Well, to tell you the truth, I'm not sure which I represent anymore. It's been so long, but either the Transportation Advisory Committee or the Citizens Involvement Committee. I'm not sure which.
Well, we're happy that you're here, Ray?
Ray Atkinson. I am the Active Transportation Representative.
All right, and Beth?
Hi, I'm Beth Goodman. I'm a project director with Echo Northwest, and I'm here to talk to you about some of the work we've been doing around housing and economic development.
All right, and Mike?
Mike Mitchell, and I'm representing the Oregon City Planning Commission.
And Heidi?
Hi, I'm actually an at-large member for this committee. I'm a parent and educator in the community and really active in the school district.
All right, welcome. And Richard?
Hi, I'm the vice chair of the Homeless Solutions Coalition of Clackamas County. So we're very concerned about creating a future that has room for people who are disaffected.
All right, and Anais?
Hi all, my name is Anais Mate. I am a land use planner with 3J Consulting. We are the project managers on the OC 2040 Vision and Comprehensive Plan update. Continuing to work with you all from visioning to comp plan. Here we go.
All right, welcome. And Margaret?
Hi, I'm Margaret Raymond. I'm also with Echo Northwest, working on the housing needs analysis and economic opportunities work.
And Denise? You're muted.
Hi, I'm Denise McGriff, and I'm representing the Oregon City Commission and, of course, all of you. And for the Echo Northwest friends, I went to school with one of your founding directors, Terry Moore. So if you want to know some dirt, oh, got the goods. And I knew the late Ed Whitelaw as well. I had him for economics at the University of Oregon. And I will be honest with you, I did not like his 8 a.m. econ class. Too early for moi.
All right, and Abe?
Hi everybody, my name is Abe Mullen, he, him pronouns. I also forget which seat I am, but I'm with the Clackamas County Public Health Division, so I try to bring the health perspective to projects. Thanks.
All right, Rochelle?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I represent Oregon City Parks and Recreation, and my name is Rochelle.
Perfect. Seth?
Hi, I'm Seth Brumley. I'm an ODOT planner and the grant manager for this project.
Great. And Emma?
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm the LGBTQ representative.
All right. Well, again, thank you everybody for taking the time to attend this meeting out of our busy lives and help us make a nice vision for the future of Oregon City in 2040. And then as we move into this next phase of this project, we'll identify goals and policies that'll help us reach that vision. Christina, did you want to share the PowerPoint, please?
And thanks for kicking us off, Laura. I realized in our PowerPoint we didn't have a icebreaker question. So maybe at the end of this meeting, if anybody has any good questions that we want to pose the group for our next meeting, send us a chat.
Ooh, I like that. All right, next slide, please. All right, so for tonight's agenda, we're going to do some project updates and just do some highlights of the work that we've been doing so far. And then we're going to move on to some overview of a draft housing study and a draft economic study. As we already identified the community vision, now we have to sort of assess what our assets are now before we identify goals and policies. For example, in housing, what is the state of housing in Oregon City today? And that data can help us really identify how we get to where we want to go. So we have presentations on those draft reports. And then we'll do an overview of some of our background information, such as the 2004 Comprehensive Plan. And then we're going to talk about what's next with those Comprehensive Plan Development Summits. And then after that, next steps. So we're glad you're here. A big night. Next slide, please. For the project updates, I wanted to thank everybody for all of the work in our visioning process. It is by far the most public involvement we've had in a planning project since I've been in Oregon City. So many people were able to send in their comments or have chats with others to identify what we like in Oregon City and where we want to be in the future. We also have been working on the draft housing needs analysis and economic study, which you'll hear about a little bit later tonight as well. They're just drafts, nothing's done, so we just want to share what we've been working on, and we'll go through the next steps with that in just a bit. And then we also did an internal review of all of the existing goals and policies in our comprehensive plan, which was from 2004. We got a bit ambitious in 2004, so I think we have around 350 goals and policies. And so we have sort of an idea of what has been accomplished. Are there places where we sort of shifted focus over time? Or we also had a lot of goals and policies that seem to be sort of ongoing. So that is our general update so far. Next slide. For the schedule, we like to show this every meeting just to look and acknowledge how far we've come and all the great work that we've done. We did the community outreach for over a year to help inform the vision statement. You guys had looked at the draft vision statement, and then it went to a joint meeting between our Planning Commission and the City Commission after that. And a week from today, it will be before the City Commission for adoption by resolution. The final draft was included in your packet, just some slight changes since you last saw that. And then we're now in the phase for updating our comprehensive plan. So we'll take a look at that vision statement, which is where we want to go, and figure out our roadmap to get there. One thing is we're going to be talking, excuse me, we're going to be talking about our housing needs analysis, and that is going to be adopted before the comprehensive plan through a separate process. So we're going to start talking about it tonight. It will help inform the work in the comprehensive plan, but its adoption timeline is slightly different. And then we hope to, at the beginning of 2022, start our series of Planning Commission and City Commission hearings for final adoption. Next slide. All right, with that, we are going to talk about trends and forecasts. Who am I passing it over to? Is it Margaret?
It's Beth who has to find her unmute button. So thank you very much, Lara. So thank you very much for having us here. We've been working on the housing needs analysis as well as an economic study with Oregon City for a little while now. I don't know all of you, and you don't know all of me. You don't know me. And I'll just introduce myself briefly by saying I've worked with a lot of cities across Oregon on housing needs analysis as well as economic opportunities analysis. So this is something that I have my head into a lot. Our housing needs analysis here builds from some work that we did with Clackamas County, which Oregon City participated in 2019. And Oregon City chose to update the information or start with the information from that analysis and update the analysis for their housing needs. So that's what we've gotten in here. Next slide, please. So cities do housing needs analysis for a lot of different reasons. One of them is to assess how much growth is expected over the next 20 years, to better understand how much land the city has, where is the buildable land, and by that I mean vacant, unconstrained land where development could happen, and we're focusing specifically on residential land. Answer the question, does Oregon City have enough buildable residential land to accommodate growth that's expected to occur over the next 20 years? Answer the questions, what are Oregon City's unmet housing needs? All of our communities in Oregon, especially those in the Portland area and the Willamette Valley, have some unmet housing needs. We'll talk about some of those tonight. And then the other reasons end up being things like, what should the policies for residential development in the city be? What policies do you need for addressing unmet housing needs? That's beyond the scope of what we're doing here, but I expect those are questions that Oregon City will be using the information from the housing needs analysis for. I see that Denise has their hand up.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I go by she.
Thank you.
One of the things that when I was in the position that Mike Mitchell currently has as a planning commissioner, I was concerned that this more site-specific needs analysis should contain some information about properties in our community that have the ability to have additional units on them. And that would be, if you live in Rivercrest, I apologize, but Rivercrest is one that just comes to mind because there are very large lots. I know that out on Central Point Road and Leland, there's a few parcels out there that are very large and could have flag lots or those sort of things. So did the information that you're looking at, did it include that type of information? Because that would be very helpful.
Yes, and I would like to address your question in a little while.
Okay,
when I get down to that slide. Okay. And so if you could put your hand down so I notice when you've got your hand up next time, that would be great. Laura and Anais, I forgot to ask, how do you like to take questions? I prefer as we go.
Sure. Yeah, I think we had discussed that, whatever works best for you, Beth. So if you would like to take questions as we go, please feel free. We do have time this evening. So yeah.
Okay. And if anybody is frantically waving their hand and I can't see them, please stop me and allow them to ask a question.
Absolutely. I'll keep an eye out as well.
Thank you. So then next slide, please. As we're talking about housing needs, we're looking at 4 basic types of housing units. And those 4 types of housing units have many types of units below them. But we're looking at single family detached, which includes things like manufactured and mobile homes. Those are both on individual lots, as well as manufactured mobile homes in parks. Single family detached can also include cottage housing, so small units that could be on one lot or could be on lots adjacent to each other. Townhouses, single family attached. Multifamily with 2 to 4 units per structure, so duplexes, tris, and quadplexes. And then multifamily with 5 or more units per structure. So some of the reason that we've got the multifamily separated out the way we do is so that we can easily talk about those kind of missing middle housing types. Those are in the background thinking of what we're doing when we're doing the housing needs analysis. We use these 4 housing types in large part because 3 of them, single family detached, single family attached, and multifamily, are required housing types to be considered in a housing needs analysis. We break out the duplexes through quads, again, for missing middle discussions. So next slide, please. So when we look at the existing housing mix in Oregon City, what we see is about 74% of existing housing stock is single family detached. Here we've still got the multifamily put together, but we take it apart a little bit later. And single family attached is 6% of your existing housing stock. So when we look at development that occurred over the last 20 years or so, On the next slide, please. What we see is that most development was single family housing types. Now here we've combined single family detached and attached into one category. That's sort of the brown black color, because the building permit system doesn't really distinguish between the two. So we know that about 93% of new housing developed since 2000 was single family housing types. What you see is that in 2013, there was a larger amount of multifamily housing developed all in that year. That's how multifamily development often happens, where you have a lot of it one year and then little of it the next year and then lots other years. So most of your new housing that's been built has been single family detached. That has implications for your housing need in the future. Let's go to the next slide, please. So when we look at housing tenure, that's home ownership, about 67% of your housing is owner occupied. That compares with places like Milwaukee or Gladstone, where 60% of their housing is owner occupied, and in Wilsonville, it's considerably different. So when you look at the owner occupied housing, 96% is single family detached, and the rest is single family attached. There may in fact be a little bit of multifamily owner occupied housing that's just not showing up in the census data, but predominantly it's single family detached. What's interesting is when you look at your renter housing, 33% of it is single family detached and 58% is multifamily. So when you think about that and you look at opportunities for rentals in Oregon City, and you've had so little multifamily developed since 2000, and your housing stock of multifamily is relatively skimpy, you don't have a lot of it, you may well have a barrier to people being able to rent housing because they're not able to find multifamily housing to rent. Next slide. Well, before we get to the next slide, I'm sorry, were there any questions about that little overview of the housing stock?
I have a quick question about, I guess, car parking, comparison between renting and owning. Whether is that being evaluated at all? Because I know a lot of times parking is included in the rent, and owning, I don't think you pay for parking unless you, somehow pay for parking separately. So I'm curious if there's any evaluation on the cost of parking difference between renting and owning.
No, that's not typically included, and I've never actually had that question come up, Ray. So no, that's not included when we start talking about cost burden, but that certainly easily could play a role. Denise, I think you had your hand up next.
Yes, one of the things that I hear a lot is that people are not necessarily looking for multiple family apartment type housing. They're looking for rental housing that are houses. And you're saying that's 33%?
Yep. So 33% of your renters live in single family detached housing. Now, when you look at housing that would be newly built for rentals, single family detached is rarely newly built for rentals. It usually goes into rentals when somebody buys it and chooses to rent it out for some reason. Mike, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I was just going to point out one thing on your back when you showed housing types built by year. 2 slides before this, I think, maybe.
Yes.
I did know, I think if I read it right, that ended in 2018, and we did have a fairly large project, phase 1 of the Cove development of multifamily come online, and probably would show up in 2019. And it was enough units that it is going to tilt that mix a fair amount.
Just a little bit. It may tilt the mix of what was built over that period. So we'll look into that and see about adding that here.
Right.
It will be there.
Because 2018, you're showing less than 100 units built. So 2019, Denise, you might have to help refresh my memory, but that was, there's 300 units or so in that phase 1, isn't there?
Yes, that's correct, Mike.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's 244, and we did pass over the newer information over to Echo as well.
Okay,
It's just
well,
the source of this is a little bit older.
we'll get that into the report. Thank you very much, Mike. And then I think Richard had his hand up.
Here's my question. You're talking about housing stocks.
Yeah.
You're not talking about the current population and how many of them have housing, don't have housing, have marginal housing, or one paycheck away from not having housing. Does your analysis do anything, have anything, do you cover the question around the population here as opposed to the stock that's available?
That is what we're going to start talking about.
Perfect, thank you.
I don't remember, and Margaret can remind us if she can look it up while we're talking, if we included data about homelessness in the report. We don't have it in our presentation because we only have so much time. But
We don't have anything in the report right now, so.
Okay. Well, we could add regional information about people experiencing homelessness to the report. So.
Thank you.
Certainly. Any other questions before I go on and talk about sales prices and then housing affordability? All right. So if you could go up a couple of slides, there we go. So the median sales price in April 2001 in Oregon City for single family housing generally is going to be $545,000. From April 2016 to 2001, housing price, this median sales price increased by nearly $200,000 or 65%. That's a big increase in sales price. Oregon City's prices are comparable to many of the cities that we're showing here. They're considerably higher than some other cities like Gresham, which their average sales price is down around $400,000. Of course, Oregon City's sales prices are below Happy Valley, Westland, and Lake Oswego. Not surprising. This has implications that we'll talk about in a few minutes for affordability. So if we go to the next slide and we look at rental costs for multifamily, and this data is from a source called CoStar, which does surveys of multifamily rental units in a town. We've got additional information in the housing needs analysis about rental costs as well on average. But what we're seeing is that an average effective multifamily rent of $1,300 and $1,350 in Oregon City in June 2021. Of course, units that have one bedrooms or studios are likely to be less than that, and larger units, 3 bedrooms and larger, are likely to be more than that. Newly built housing is likely to be more expensive than existing housing. So we know all of those details. But in general, we're using the average of $1,350 a month in rent for multifamily housing to illustrate some points as we go along. So then we look at median household income on the next slide. And what we see is that the median household income in Oregon City is about nearly $72,000. When we look at the change since 2000 and we adjust that for inflation, what we see is that Oregon City's median household income increased by nearly $3,000, which is better than what Clackamas County and Oregon's median household incomes did in decreasing slightly. So median household income has at least held its own and grown a little bit since 2000, and it's averaging around $72,000. So if we go to the next slide and we look at cost burden. So a household is said to be cost burdened if they're paying 30% or more of their gross income for housing costs. They're said to be cost burdened. So in Oregon City, 35% of households are cost burdened. The Portland average for the region for the 3-county area is about 37%. So households in Oregon City are about cost burden as often as they are in the region. So housing costs for renters includes things like rent. It includes certain utilities like electricity and heat. For homeowners, it includes mortgage, it includes interest, insurance, as well as those same certain utilities like electricity and heat. So if we go to the next slide, what we see is that homeowners are cost burdened less frequently than renters. About half of your households who rent are cost burdened, and about 25% are severely cost burdened, meaning that they pay 50% or more of their gross income for rent. These folks are the folks who are really in trouble. And so 25% of your renter households are paying 50% or more of their income for housing costs. So before I go and start talking about future affordability issues, are there questions about these slides? Okay. So next slide, please. So when we look at what housing in the future may be financially attainable in Oregon City, what we start with is this construct of the idea of median family income in Clackamas County. So the regional median family income is $92,100. So a household that earns $92,100 can afford about $2,300 in monthly rent. So they can certainly afford monthly rent in Oregon City. I'm sure there are some rental units that are above that, but the majority of rental units are likely to be below that. They can also afford a dwelling unit that costs, has a sales price of up to about $370,000. That's considerably below Oregon City's median sales price of $45,000. So a household would have to earn about 148% or $136,000 of median family income, 148% of median family income to afford the median sales price in Oregon City. So that's quite high comparatively. As we're thinking about future housing affordability and how new housing will be developed, what we do is we look at households that earn less than 50% of median family income. These households here are generally able to afford housing that's below average rents. So the rents that they're able to afford are about $1,150 a month. So they can't afford market rate rents. Housing that's built that's affordable to these households, and there is considerable need for housing affordable to these households. That housing is going to be built not necessarily by the private market, but it's going to be built through things like your nonprofit agencies who build affordable housing, your housing authority. They'll be built with things like Metro bond funds. These are places where Oregon City, as it talks about different housing policies, may look at housing affordability policies to support housing development that's affordable at less than 50% of median family income. So then your households between median 50% and 80% of median family income, they can afford market rate rent, but housing is generally not built, newly built, that's affordable in those income ranges. Newly built housing that's affordable in those income ranges almost always has some sort of public subsidy. When you get up to 120% of median family income, that's where newly built housing is really occurring, especially for single family detached. So most of your new single family detached is going to be affordable well above 120% of median family income, but some of it could be, some housing might be built that's affordable down around, $400,000, $450,000. That's at least plausible. So if we go to the next slide. So we've carried over these same income groups. And what we're showing here is that in Oregon City, about 14% of households have extremely low income income of 30% of median family income or below. So these are your households who are just holding on. They're at risk of becoming homeless. They're generally speaking in the most dire straits. Right behind them is households earning between 30 and 50% of median family income. 15% of your households are in that category. So between those two categories, you've got a little fewer than 4,000 households between those categories that are earning less than 50% of median family income. As we look up the ladder, you can see that 27% of your households have income at 120% of median family income or above. As I mentioned before, your publicly subsidized affordable housing, generally built that's affordable, less than 60% of median family income. Your middle income and your workforce housing is between 60 and 120%. So there are questions about those affordability statistics, essentially, ideas. There's a lot more information about affordability in the housing needs analysis. It is a grim picture. So then I'm gonna, Denise, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how maybe this is too hard for my brain, but so we've got HUD MFI for Clackamas County, and then you have ACS household income for Oregon City. So what are the differences between, I mean, I know what HUD FMI is, but I don't understand what the differences are. And
sure, I'll explain this. So I'm gonna flip back. Will you flip back to the last slide? So the HUD MFI at $92,100, 30% of that is $28,000. If we forward to the next slide. So about 14% of Oregon City's population has income of $28,000 or below. So we've used American Community Survey household income distribution to get us to the estimate that 14% of Oregon City's households have income at $28,000 or below.
Okay.
Does that help explain that?
Sort of. It looks like it's an extrapolation. So this is
an extrapolation.
This is not exact then.
No, it's certainly not exact, but it's approximately correct.
Okay. What percentage is it approximately correct?
Oh, I couldn't say that. You've got a certain amount of uncertainty from the fact that the American Community Survey is a survey itself. And you've got the fact that the way that American Community Survey presents data for households, say, that earn $25,000 to $30,000, they're all in one group. So you've extrapolated approximately that number in that group who earns $28,000. But we know from the ACS data about the number of households that earn less than $25,000. So it's a pretty reasonable approximation, but I'm not going to say I'm positive that it's 14% and not 15%, or 14% and not 13% of your households.
I mean, I guess because I'm going to need to rely on some of this data for decision making. So I'm trying to understand, is this generally 50 to 60% accurate with some margin of error, or am I looking at a higher percentage of 80%? And the rest is obviously extrapolation. So
the extrapolations are small.
Okay.
And so the way I would look at this is I would say about 30%, it's 29% here, but about 30% of your households have very low income. So income of 50% or below. Is that really 28%? Is it really 32%?
It's close.
I don't know. It's somewhere a little less than a third.
Okay. Well, it kind of leads me into something I've been struggling over. We have, like I said, what I hear most often is that people are looking for single family houses to, they, whatever reason, for their kids, or they have, older adults, or they're just middle adults or whatever. They don't want to be in apartments. And what my concern is, this is something we've struggled with, and Laura can relate to this, is that we have a small percentage of people in our community who want to take available housing stock and turn it into short-term rentals. And I am struggling with that because of the fact that I believe that that will diminish and help us lose a lot of single-family housing that could be rented to people who are in, are 80% of MFI. And I think that that's important because that keeps neighborhoods stable to a certain degree. I'm not against extended stay, stuff like that, but I have a concern that there are just so many problems I see with that. I don't want to get into a discussion about it, but there are so many problems that come with that again reduces our housing stock, that I want to keep us, with available housing stock that can be turned over, that can be rented to families, that can be rented to singles, that can, some people just prefer to live in a house.
Sure.
And, if they're all, not all, but if, we got this constant turnover and people coming and going, maybe there's another place we look at it to help our tourism industry that's not smack dab in the middle of, taking that housing stock. I see Ray nodding, so.
So what I would say is that
It's a struggle.
That is a rich area for policy discussion.
Exactly. But I'm just throwing it out there because it has to do with our housing stock.
Certainly it does. So Richard, you had a question.
I'm just trying to grasp this, and pardon me if I'm a little dense. So if I add the numbers, number of households across left to right, looks like around 13,000.
Okay.
Is that right?
I haven't tried adding them. So
Okay.
Yes.
So if there's 13,000 households, we're talking about Oregon City proper, right? Within the city limits?
City limits, yeah.
Okay. So what this is showing me is that 51%, the middle and the left two bars, low income, very low income, and extremely low income. So 50% of the people who live in Oregon City are in those categories. Half of our citizens,
yes,
are there. So if we're building a plan, a 2040 plan, that means that we either need to lower the cost of housing or do something to support improvement of economic well-being, so people get paid more, so they can afford more. Just trying to think, what is our vision going forward? Because if we just extrapolate, we just say, let's just move this in 2040, it'll have the same configuration. That means that we basically are going to be a struggling community with half of us struggling to find a place to live and to stay in those places.
You have captured the essential facts. And what would the policy be and what is the vision? Those are beyond what I've been asked to discuss today.
So your analysis is helping us to see that there are some policy implications that are required for us to be considering in order to actually make a shift in the way in the character of the population of Oregon City.
Yes, or in other words, address unmet housing needs is another way of putting it. When we look at future housing needs, we assume, what if this distribution of incomes stays the same? Then 30%, 29% of your new households will need housing that is income restricted housing. It's really hard to build that housing. It's very expensive to build that housing. What is it that Oregon City is going to choose to do to meet that unmet housing need is a question that that cities are challenged to answer in Oregon. Emma, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I don't think that we can really look at the housing issue without including in it jobs issues and economic development. And the reason that I say that is, if you'll grant me this just for about 30 seconds, when Oregon City first started, it was a mill town and everybody worked at the mill. And it was like a good paying, working class income. And if you look at the housing, like especially around McLaughlin and, the older housing, like where I live, that's the kind of housing it was. It was housing for families who worked at the mill. And, in the last 50 years, most of the people who moved to Oregon City, well, maybe the last 40 years, Oregon City's become more of a bedroom community. So I think that's part of the reflection between the difference between the housing price, the average housing price of 540,000, and when you compare it with other communities. So I don't think that on the one hand, Oregon City is doing really well. I mean, we have good housing prices, these figures fall within the demographics that you would expect, but there's some underlying issues that I think are kind of part of this discussion. I mean, what is that there aren't really a lot of places of employment, like service industry kind of jobs in Oregon City. And so most people who might be kind of in those lower categories are already kind of pre-screened out of Oregon City. They stay up in Portland, they stay in Gresham, they stay in places where they have more access to public transit and where they can get around more easily to where those service jobs are. And so I think that's part of the conversation. And that also plays out in how Oregon City's demographics look in terms of race. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Certainly. And you lead me to about 5 slides from now. So we'll get there. Unless anybody else has any questions, I'm going to continue on and go a little bit faster so that I don't take all of your meeting. So then we did an inventory. Thank you for changing the slide. Then we did an inventory of land inside of Oregon City's city limits. And we looked at land that's unconstrained, vacant, and partially vacant. It includes land in the city limits and the UGB areas. And what we found is that there's about 425 acres of land that's designated for low density, that is vacant and partially vacant and does not have a constraint. So what does partially vacant, what does unconstrained mean? It means that there is not something like a steep slope, so a slope greater than 25%. It's not in the floodplain, it's not in the floodway. And then we looked at natural resource areas like riparian areas and wetlands. So it's not any of those sorts of things. And Margaret, if I get any of that wrong, please correct me, because Margaret actually did that analysis. So vacant land, that's pretty clear. It's land that doesn't have a substantial development on it. And partially vacant land is land that has some development on it, but where more development could reasonably occur. Is it all of the land that was discussed earlier for potential infill? Probably not, but is it a portion of that land? I would expect so. So where you've got large lots, where you could reasonably have new development, that's the kind of thing that's included in partially vacant. So I'm not going to read off all of the numbers of acres that we've got here, but these are in our buildable lands inventory. And based on that, I'll talk about, based on that, we look at historical development densities, and we come up with an estimate for new capacity of that land, which we'll look at in a few moments. So the next slide, please. So when we look at the forecast for population growth for Oregon City, the city is expected to grow by about 9,800 new people between 2020 and 2041. Next slide, please. That's expected to add 5,792 new households, new dwelling units to Oregon City. So when we look at the types of dwelling units that would be needed in the future, we start with a rule that is a statewide rule about cities within the metro urban growth boundary. Cities within the metro UGB must plan to accommodate at least 50% of new housing in single family attached or multifamily housing types. So put another way, cities within the metro UGB cannot assume that more than 50% of new housing will be single family detached. So that is the underlying basis for our forecast of housing needs by type of housing. We assumed that 50% of new housing would be single family detached. That's a considerable departure from what happened in the past. And that 20% would be single family attached, 10% would be new multifamily that are quad and triplex, and 20% would be new multifamily with 5 or more units. So with those assumptions, we also look at the capacity of vacant land, which we just looked at vacant land a few minutes ago, at nearly 6,900 units of dwelling unit capacity in your vacant land. So our preliminary conclusion is that Oregon City has enough land to accommodate the forecast of new housing. Let me add one caveat here, which is that when we look at the forecast for new dwellings, we're looking really closely at the metro forecast right now to make sure that all of the areas that are inside the UGB, outside of Oregon City's city limits, so in Oregon City's urban growth management area, we want to make sure that we included all of those because the metro forecast gets a little bit tricky. So based on what we see now, Oregon City has enough land to accommodate expected growth. Next slide, please. So our conclusions are about monitoring land availability to make sure that the city continues to have enough land, monitoring future development and looking at future densities and housing mix. Those are both important, but I think for Oregon City and for your task coming up, more important are looking for opportunities for affordable housing development for both rental and home ownership. And that would lead to looking for opportunities for housing development that's affordable of all housing types. So not just single family detached, but a wider range of housing types. And part and parcel of that is continuing the process of developing and adopting zoning code to comply with House Bill 2001. And then of course, we recommend that the city adopt the housing needs analysis as an appendix to the comprehensive plan. So that's what we had about housing. We now have also some information about economic development. Before we go on to economic development and looking at the time, we're getting close on our time. Are there any burning questions about housing?
Beth, I'll just make a quick note about your timing. You're okay. I need the last 15 minutes of the meeting. So
okay,
yeah.
All right.
No sweat if you need a little bit more time.
All right. So with that, are there any questions about the housing? There's a lot of information in the housing needs analysis report. Okay, so if we can go on to economic study findings. So what we did here.
Just a quick question. So where is the study?
Where is the report?
Yeah.
That's a question for Laura.
The report is online at oc2040.com and it was included in the email sent to with this meeting invite as well.
Okay, maybe it was just big enough that I didn't open it up all the way.
Yep, if you go under OC 2040 and look at the project advisory team, it'll have all the documents for this meeting under there.
And it is a big file, big and long. So on the next slide, please. What we're doing here is we're looking at factors that affect economic development. There's a study called an economic opportunities analysis, which does the same thing that the housing needs analysis does, looking at land, forecast for economic growth, that kind of thing. This is not that. The city wasn't in a position at this point, or chose not to at this point, to conduct an economic opportunities analysis, but the city does want information to support economic development. So what we've provided here, the memorandum that we've provided, gives information about Oregon City's current economic conditions. We focused on existing businesses and jobs in Oregon City, looking at Oregon City's advantages and disadvantages, and we'll ask you about those in a few minutes. And the report also provides additional information that's useful for economic development policies and setting those policies in the future. Next slide. So what we've got here is a slide that compares the change in covered employment in Oregon City between 2008 and 2018. Covered employment is all employees who are covered by unemployment insurance. And you might ask, who is not covered by unemployment insurance? So anybody who is a sole proprietor, anybody who is a 1099 employee, there's some small categories like railroad employees aren't covered by unemployment insurance. Why do we use covered employment data? Because it's the best available data that we can get for a city. It's actually confidential data, so we have to be careful working with it because it contains information that's confidential about specific employers, number of employees, and payroll. So this data is data we're lucky to get, and it's the only place, the only high quality place to get data about employment in a city. So when we look at the change in covered employment in Oregon City between 2008 and 18, we saw growth of about 1,000 employees over that time period. So it's fairly small growth comparatively. The areas where you had the most growth were things like healthcare and social assistance, retail, trade, accommodations, and food services. When you look at your overall economy, you see a lot of jobs in government. And I was questioning that as I was looking at this data going, why? And then I thought, Oregon City is the county seat. Well, that's why. And of course, you've got school districts as well as local government. So a lot of your employment is in government. Healthcare and social assistance play an important role, and they're a growing sector. Things like retail, trade, accommodations, and food services are also growing. When we look at information about payroll in a few moments, those are among the lower paid industries. Things like construction and manufacturing, other types of industrial sectors, those are relatively smaller in Oregon City. Mike, you have a question.
Where does it,
I'm sorry, you muted yourself.
where does education show up on here?
Education, unless it's private education, would show up in government. So your K through 12 schools are in government. If you have
college, and the community college would be there as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions before I go on? Denise, you have a question.
Not a question, but it would be interesting to see how the COVID situation affects this, because I think that's going to be sort of a big blip if you go to 2019, 2020, 2021. I think we're going to see a substantial change in some of this.
So you might well. The 2020 data isn't going to be ready until next fall. When we did this, the 2018 data was the most recently available. But what we have seen is obviously things like accommodations and food services took a drastic decrease in 2020. They've begun recovering. They're continuing to recover. I think the state is expecting employment recovery to hit prior levels of employment before 2024. So that's actually coming back fast, but is the mix going to be different? And the mix may well be somewhat different. So next slide, please. So your industries that are faster growth, so like healthcare and social assistance especially, that's one of your higher wage industries. We're seeing average wages above $80,000 on an average wage per employee basis. We also are showing that it was one of the higher wage industries in 2008. Manufacturing, of course, is a high wage industry. Other industrial sectors, that includes things like wholesale trade, transportation, and warehousing, utilities, that kind of thing. That's relatively high wage. Your accommodations and food services, I'm actually going to ask that we go back and look at that, because just looking at that just now, that doesn't look right. I would expect that to be considerably lower, but maybe I'm wrong. your retail trade at about 40,000 wage. That also seems plausible. Government wages, I'm kind of wondering if we don't have accommodations and food services mislabeled with government, because that's where I would expect accommodations and food services. So we'll double check that. So I'm gonna direct us onto the next slide. We'll get the right information on that one. So this this chart shows the difference in businesses by size of business in 2008 and 2018. And what we're seeing is that in 2018, about 42% of your employment was in businesses with 20 or fewer people. That was up a little bit from 2008. About 58% of your businesses had more than 20 employees in 2018. And so when we're looking at the size of your businesses, the point here is that a lot of your businesses are smaller. So they're smaller than 50 people, and a lot of your businesses are smaller than 10 people or 20 people. They're an important part of your economy. They're a place where Oregon City really has the opportunity to influence growth. And what we're seeing here partially is a representation of Oregon City's economic development policies and focus on small businesses. So if you continue focusing on small businesses, you'll probably continue growing small businesses. This is an opportunity, say, for entrepreneurship. So paying attention to where your employment is coming from, and that a portion of it's coming from larger businesses, but really not a lot. That's true for a lot of Oregon communities. It's a little more true in Oregon City than some. So if we go to the next slide. So when we look at commute patterns, what we see is that 86% of Oregon City residents who work, they commute outside the city for work. So a relatively small share of people who work in Oregon City also live in Oregon City. About 2,200 people live and work in Oregon City. About 13,000 people commute in, and about 14,700 commute out. That's about what I would expect for a city like Oregon City, part of a larger regional economy. A lot of people work in Oregon. A lot of people work in Portland and live in Oregon City. A lot of people live in Portland and work in Oregon City. You have those options for commuting within the region. So commuting plays a really big role. One of the questions that you might be thinking about is, how can Oregon City provide more opportunities for people to live and work in Oregon City? It's a question a lot of cities ask. It's potentially an important question, especially when you look at both transportation costs for the individual and the cost of transportation systems for the city or for the region. Those are important things. But I think realizing that Oregon City is just smack dab in the middle of a big region, and some people are going to want to live there, and maybe a spouse works up in Portland and another spouse works in Tualatin or something like that. So you're not going to be able to influence everybody's commuting behavior, but there's probably opportunities for more people to live and work in Oregon City. Next slide, please. So part of what we were doing in the economic study is looking at Oregon City's competitive advantages and disadvantages. We were really good on getting some of the advantages. The disadvantages, I'm thinking there may be some disadvantages that you guys can think of that we didn't necessarily come up with. But things like location and transportation and access to markets and to labor, it's really superior in Oregon City compared to a lot of Oregon's other cities. Costs of rent, comparatively affordable. Costs of home ownership, I would debate that that's an advantage, actually. You've got buildable commercial and industrial land that other cities likely don't have, and you've got tourism and access to outdoor recreation, a high quality of life. Those are all big advantages. So is there anything that you think we're missing here that you'd like us to look into more? Denise, you have your hand up.
Yeah,
You muted yourself again.
I would add transportation to the disadvantage. As already pointed out, if you do not have a car.
That's true.
Or other mode of transportation, not accepting Ray, it's hard to get around here because our topography does not lend itself to a lot of walking. It is in certain neighborhoods, but generally, you know, if you need to go from where I live up to the hilltop, that is a slog.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Okay, so need for the lack of non-automotive oriented transportation systems.
Well, yeah, and basically, yeah, I mean, I would say that because even though we just got this new little shuttle, it's not like walking out the door in Milwaukee and getting on Max.
Sure.
The best system is if you're going in a straight line from Portland to Oregon City on the 99, it works. If you need to go someplace else, it's a little slow. And it does, you know, you spend a couple of hours waiting for some sort of transportation. And that's unfortunately a little bit of a disadvantage. I mean, not a little bit, but it's a lot.
Certainly. Emma, you have your hand up.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I want to echo what Denise said about transportation. The fact that we do hub-based transportation where everything is toward the central city of Portland, the core city, makes it really difficult for people who live out in these outlying communities to get to different, like there's a lot of jobs, for instance, in Gresham, it would take forever to get to, or, you know, over on the west side. The other question that I just wanted to ask was, you mentioned about 86% of Oregon City residents commute. And I'm just wondering, like, from a value-based perspective, do you think that that's, first of all, is that comparable to other outlying bedroom communities like Oregon City? And secondly, is that a good, is that a good base for building like stability within a community? I mean, do you have people who live here in Oregon City who are really invested in Oregon City, or are people just living here because it's just where they found housing, but their life is really someplace else?
So it is comparable to some other bedroom communities. I seem to remember about 45 to 50% of people who work in Portland live somewhere else. So commuting into Portland is actually pretty common. A place like Tualatin, where I did some work fairly recently, had very high levels of commuting in and commuting out. A lot of other cities, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe West Lynn, when I looked at their data years ago now, like 5 years ago, 4% of people lived and worked in West Lynn. So it's not unusual. What is my value judgment? I tend not to, I try not to make the analysis normative. In other words, I try not to impose my norms on a city's information. But since you asked, I think having more opportunities for people to live and work in Oregon City, especially at jobs that aren't super high paying. So in other words, more housing that's affordable to people who work in Oregon City would be, if I was a decision maker in Oregon City, something I'd be interested in seeing. So, Bob, you have your hands up.
Yes, in regard to the transportation, I agree with Commissioner McGriff. A good example of problems with transportation, of course, was last year's wildfires, and anybody trying to get out of an area that was in danger, all of them came right through Oregon City, and those of us in Oregon City couldn't get out of our own city.
Yeah.
And so the transportation, and then of course the typical daily traffic pileup approaching the I-205 bridge going across the Willamette River just this afternoon was just a mess. So until they get that straightened out, transportation is, in my opinion, is a disadvantage. And the cost of doing business, I'd call that a wash. I wouldn't call it an advantage or a disadvantage.
We're comparing it to other communities, but we can look at that more closely. So, Ray, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to agree with Denise and Bob as well about transportation being a disadvantage. And I was reading through the report, and on page 17, it looks like it defines how transportation is being evaluated. It looks like it's focused on access to highways like Highway 213, I-205, and Highway 99. And so there's some focus on transit below, but it looks like the main reason why transportation was seen as an advantage was because of highway access. And I guess for me, representing active transportation, that focusing more on transit, walking, and biking. And I also wanted to see SMART. Wilsonville SMART is in the bullet point for transportation, and Wilsonville SMART does not come to Oregon City. Just wanted to. There's some changes that be made, and also the new shuttle needs to be added to it as well, and the CCC Express shuttle for college also needs to be added to that paragraph. So.
What about
Cool.
the one in Canby? CAT comes to Oregon City.
It does, yeah. But for Wilsonville, you have to go to Canby and then transfer to CAT to get to Oregon City.
Well, we may have been working off of old information or just had it wrong, and we'll get that correct. So I'm hearing that transportation, both in terms of automotive, at times is an issue with congestion. Transit is an issue inside Oregon City, as well as connections with the region, and then bike and pedestrian facilities. Okay, I'm catching all the points. Thank you, Ray. Denise, you had one comment.
Yeah, Ray, you just, it couldn't have been better if we had planned this. So when you talked about the emphasis on access to highways, that is attributed directly to the high crash rates we have at those locations. So I've been following a lot of the data from the Oregon City Police Department, and 213, 205, where all those things intersect, because we have a lot of people who are commuting. I'm not saying all these crashes are attributed to commuters, but that is a substantial portion of what is causing our high traffic crashes, which in turn causes our insurance rates to go up because they're looking at crash data. So there's sort of a ripple effect that happens, and it's getting people to understand that when they come into Oregon City or any city, they're in a city. They're not on 205 going 55 in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. But that's behavior. 2040 is not going to correct people's behavior. But you talk to our traffic guys, man, they have got a list a mile long about assumptions like that. So I just wanted to throw that in the mix, that disadvantaged transportation, possibly high insurance rates, and high volume of crashes.
And so I think I would reframe our transportation advantage here for freight movement, because that's why it's in the list. So I have come to 7:15, and I feel the need to honor Anais's request for 15 minutes.
Did you put freight after that?
Yes. So that's what I want.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's what we'll do.
Great. Beth, you can finish up. You can, if you need a couple more minutes.
I have one more slide.
Great.
So looking at opportunities for growth, really, I would reorder these and say continue to invest in downtown, look at opportunities for streamlining the development process, and looking at opportunities to better serve underserved and minority business owners or business owners of color. So those are some of the opportunities for growth that we identified in this very small analysis.
You include underserved as MWESB?
We weren't being so specific as that specifically.
Well, so for those of you, that means minority, women-owned, emerging small businesses, which would include somewhat underserved and minority business owners. It's kind of a broader category that deals with a lot of underserved need that we have in this community.
Mm-hmm. Were there any questions or any comments at this point?
Just thank you. Great job. A lot of good information.
Oh, good. Thank you. Mike, you had a comment.
Yeah, just on this slide, maybe we could say greater downtown. I think when people see downtown, they have a tendency to think of just Main Street. but we now have opportunities at the old Rossman landfill site and the rest of the cove and the Willamette Falls area. So it's investing in the greater downtown area, that whole zone.
Sure.
And I agree that calling out underserved and minority business owners makes sense, but I'd like to see it say something like better serve all business owners, especially underserved and minority, because there's an opportunity to help all business owners in Oregon City.
Mike, I'm going to disagree with you. If she probably needs to add another line, because down on Washington Street by the transfer station, that is not downtown. And since you've served on the Downtown Association, there's an area that is downtown. That is not downtown. So
That's Commissioner McGriff, that's the point I'm trying to make. We don't want to limit our opportunities for growth and our efforts to just the downtown area.
Add another line talking about the area side of downtown.
I'm fine with that, but we need to make sure that we're not just talking about, and I agree that Main Street downtown, capital D downtown is critical, but so is that whole area.
We'll work with Laura to get the right geographies in there.
North End, whatever.
Thank you.
And that is all I had for you.
Thanks so much, Beth. Really appreciate it. You just provided over an hour, or an hour almost, of really great information. So thank you. I will take it from here and give you a breather. We just have a few more minutes left. I don't have a ton more slides, but there are just a couple of things I wanted to go over, and then also just pull this group for some ideas as we think ahead to our next activities. So in addition to the monstrous amount of information you received in your packets, like the draft findings from the supplemental housing needs analysis and the economic study, we also pulled together a background report that outlined information about the current comprehensive plan, as well as some kind of baseline information around some of the topics that are related to the statewide planning goals, organized by the 4 vision categories. So I'm just going to quickly, next slide, just remind you all, we are working with quite a bit of information already. Not only do we have the data and the findings from the 2 reports that Beth just presented on, but we also have a very, very lengthy current comprehensive plan. It consists of 15 different sections. So the current comprehensive plan is organized by statewide planning goal. Across all of those sections, there's about 65 goals. And then among all of those goals, there's about just under 300 different policies. So there's a lot of content here in the comprehensive plan. And as Laura had mentioned, we've been doing an internal audit and review of all of those goals and policies, and just kind of starting the process of identifying, what policies are moot or have been completed or are no longer relevant, kind of which ones are still ongoing, and then what are we missing? So we're really working from a lot of existing content, and we're going to be looking to the existing comprehensive plan as a starting point for, apologies. Sorry, dog barking in the background. We'll be using the current comprehensive plan as a starting point when we revisit our goals and our policies for the updated plan. But I think that overall, we are certainly looking at a new comprehensive plan that will have far fewer than 65 goals and fewer policies, just having something that's a little bit more user-friendly, readable, and is not nearly as dense. So that's kind of where we're going. And then just, in terms of implementation, do note that the comprehensive plan, as we had talked about, and as is outlined in that comp plan summary from the last PAT meeting, if you recall how do we write goals and policies? We're still working at a pretty high level. So we're really looking at developing goals and policies and language around those goals and policies that are still fairly high level. The implementation of the comprehensive plan always goes through in its master plans, concept plans, the development code, the zoning map. So there's a lot of pieces that really give this document legs. So I just wanted to provide a little bit reminder to all about what this is and where we're going. Next slide. You've seen this before, but this is our, our little matrix of how we're going from our vision to the topic areas to the statewide planning goals, and then the founding principles that were identified or presented in the current comprehensive plan. So we're just trying to make sure that we are linking the broad ideas that are identified in our vision, and then coming down and identifying what are those topic areas, which are the ones that we must speak to regarding statewide planning goals, knowing that there will be more language, of course, added beyond just the statewide planning goals, given the broader number of topics captured in our vision statement, and then also just finding those linkages within the existing comprehensive plan. Denise, you had your hand raised?
I believe that somebody, that wasn't me, asked for, when we did that chart again, they were going to see how the city commission goals lined up with all of these. And there was supposed to be one more column.
Okay, I must have missed that. This came directly as a snippet from the background report, but I appreciate that. We will update that with the city council goals. Thank you.
Yeah, I think somebody asked that like 2 or 3 meetings ago, wanted to know how the goals aligned and what I could remember because we hadn't finalized it.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. I knew somebody did.
Great.
So
thank you so much, Denise. Appreciate it. We'll make note of that. Okay. Next slide. There we go. Chapter development summits. This is kind of our next big item that's coming up in the fall. I say fall, but actually happening in the next month and a half, so time is ticking. We provided just a little one-page fact sheet about what these chapter summits will be like in the fall. So next slide. So we are going to have 4 virtual meetings. We're not going to be necessarily going in the order that they are in the vision for a variety of reasons, but primarily just wanting to make sure that we have clear calendars across all of the different city commissions and committees for each of these topic areas. But we are going to start with a virtual meeting on diverse economy. And we're going to be doing 1 chapter or 1 summit per week, running from mid-September to about mid-October. So 4 weeks, 1 a week. We have different times and different days to help essentially make sure that everyone that has, or just to account for different regular and irregular working hours. All of the virtual workshops will also be recorded, and they will also include simultaneous Spanish translation. So we will have opportunity for all of that. I see some hands up. I'm just gonna go through a couple more details here before I answer questions. But essentially, after each of these virtual meetings, we are also going to have an in-person component to this. So folks that aren't able to show up virtually, for some 10 o'clock in the morning is great. For others, 10 o'clock in the morning is not. So everything will be recorded, but we will also have an in-person event. There will essentially be kind of drop-in hours the morning after our virtual meeting. We're kind of calling them coffee and comp plan drop-in hours, and that will be an opportunity where city staff will be there. They'll have a flip chart up. They'll have some notes from the conversation that occurred in the meeting the night before, just available and ready as discussion points for anybody that wants to come in, ask questions, kind of have one-on-one conversations with city staff. So we'll kind of be doing a 2-pronged approach for each of these 4 chapters. And then I do know that on this slide, there is that column with interested PHE members. As of the last meeting, folks did identify a chapter that they were most interested in. I noted those here. They certainly can change. They're not set in stone. You are welcome to attend all of the summits if you'd like. You can attend one in particular, but in terms of PAT roles and responsibilities, we're really excited to have you there to be a part of the breakout discussion groups we're going to have, as well as being able to take notes, help with report backs, and just really have a PAT presence at these workshops. So we have a few more minutes left. I'll take questions, but then we did run out of time for kind of my discussion that I wanted to have. But Emma, I'll start with you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I'm not sure what to do with this information because, I mean, you know, like the city council just approved a $250 million budget that only includes $40,000 for homeless. And I think that Oregon City is becoming a much more difficult place to live for poor people. I think that poor people basically are kind of getting pushed out of Oregon City because anyone who's living on like disability or is a senior living on, you know, disability income or, you know, low income cannot afford to live in Oregon City. And I don't really see anything in our discussion tonight about really how to address those issues. So I would appreciate it if in the future we have more conversation, or especially around issues of access for people of low income and homeless people, because to me, Oregon City has more homeless people and less low income people because people just can't afford to live here anymore.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. I would suggest if you are interested in continuing those conversations to try and attend the Summit on Diverse Economy, where we'll be talking about jobs and housing. That would be one where, yeah, your PAT representation would be greatly appreciated. We can dig into those discussions even further with the broader community. Ray.
So I have all staff training on that Tuesday, September 21st in the morning. And so I don't know how much flexibility there is about that time, but I don't think I'm allowed to get out of the required training for all employees. And so just wanted to let you know about my scheduling conflict that I have on that day.
Okay, let's chat offline about that, Ray. I'll follow up with you after this meeting, but thanks for letting us know. Denise?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. Next slide. I just restated this verbally, but PAT and purpose. So really the purpose of these summits, we just ask that you show up. There's no preparation needed for any of these, but really our goal is to understand community priorities around the topics that are covered at each of these summits. And we're not going to walk out of these summits with clear language around every goal and every policy that will be part of the comprehensive plan, but what we will be walking out of will be a bunch of ideas and concepts that we as a group will be able to massage and think through in October at our next PAT meeting. And as I mentioned, we'll have these drop-in hours to kind of supplement the virtual component of those meetings the morning after. And then in addition, we will also have an online survey that will run just after all of those 4 summits and kind of recoup all of the key ideas that came out of each of those 4 meetings. And we'll have an online survey where folks can provide additional input as they can. So lots of stuff happening, lots of preparation happening behind the scenes for all of those. It is 7:30 on the dot. My last slide was based on what you've heard tonight. What are some key questions and considerations that you're most interested in discussing further at these summits? There are some interesting policy concepts that rose to the top through this conversation we had tonight. My thought is, since it is 7:30, I would love for if you had any reflections on the meeting this evening, anything that you thought that was a really good topic or kind of a pinch point that would be worthwhile discussing further, please email Laura your thoughts. We are going to be in the process of developing some kind of broad questions to help lead the discussion that we have at each of these 4 summits. And we really love your input on what are the key topics and what are the key questions that we might want to be discussing with the broader community. So if you can, and if anything spoke to you, please do email Laura your thoughts. And we can also do a little bit of an email exchange and just kind of collect what we get in the next couple of days and then share it back out to all of you so you can see what folks thought of. Does that work for everyone? Okay, thank you. Great. Emma, you had your hand still raised, or is that old? That may be Emma. Did you have a new question, or was that a hand raised from earlier?
I'm sorry, I was trying to press my unmute button. No, that
No
was from
worries.
earlier. I'm sorry.
No worries.
I'll lower my.
Great. Okay, Laura, I will hand it. Oh, I'll hand it back over to you. You're back on mute by accident.
The mute button. I just wanted to again thank everybody for taking time out to help Oregon City grow in a way which is managed and helps elevate some of our goals and priorities. And then also we'll be reaching out to each of you individually as well as all of the PAT members to touch base before the summits anyway, and we can have a deeper conversation, and any of those comments in the question that Anais just posed, we can take your feedback through that too. So we'll be calling you if there's any ways that you can think of that we can help support other PAT members who have not been able to show up at these meetings as regular. Please let us know. But again, thank you for your attendance here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.
And our next meeting is when?
Oh, sorry, we missed the date. It's the last Wednesday of the month, and the next one is in October. So that would be October. I'm looking at my calendar. Sorry, October 27th. But we will be seeing you before then at one of those virtual summits in September, and we'll follow up with you about those. All right, so you have the month of August off.
All right, thank you, everybody. We'll see you at the summit.